I know the exact moment Alessandro Thorne notices I exist as something other than the girl who cleans his house and brings him coffee without being asked. And it's when his younger brother Reed's hand settles on my lower back while guiding me through the crowded ballroom like I'm someone worth protecting, instead of the hired help who's only here because Reed thought it would be funny to bring his family's maid as his date to their annual charity gala. The dress I'm wearing is borrowed from Reed's last girlfriend and altered to fit my smaller frame. Simple black silk that would take half a year of my salary to buy new. And I can feel eyes tracking us as we move through a crowd of people who know exactly who I am and are probably already calculating the scandal of a Thorne bringing staff to an event where appearances are everything. Alessandro is standing by the bar with a woman who looks like she walked out of a magazine, all perfect hair and bored elegance, and I watch his whiskey glass pause halfway to his lips when he sees us, his dark eyes tracking from Reed's easy smile to the hand still resting possessively on my back with an intensity that makes my skin prickle with awareness. I absolutely should not be feeling about a man who's never looked at me long enough to remember my name in 3 years of daily interaction. You're staring at your brother. If you're having second thoughts about this terrible idea, we can still leave before anyone important notices. I keep my voice low, because the last thing I need is someone overhearing that I'm nervous about being here. About wearing a dress I don't own, and pretending I belong in a world where my father drives their cars and my mother used to clean their floors before her arthritis got too bad. About wearing a dress I don't own, and pretending I belong in a world where my father drives their cars and my mother used to clean their floors before her arthritis got too bad. I'm not having second thoughts. I'm enjoying the fact that Alessandro looks like he wants to commit fratricide, which means this is already the best date I've had all year. Reed's grin is wicked and completely unconcerned with social consequences, which is easy when you're 24, and the younger son who doesn't have to care about family reputation the way his older brother does. You brought me here to make your brother angry. That's either incredibly immature, or there's some family drama I don't understand. Both. Definitely both. Alessandro has been insufferable lately about who I date and what I do with my time. So I figured bringing someone he can't possibly object to without sounding like a snob would force him to confront his control issues. I'm not someone. I'm your family's employee, and using me as a weapon in whatever sibling rivalry you're engaged in is going to get me fired when this backfires spectacularly. He won't fire you. You're the only person who can make his coffee exactly right, and he's superstitious about changing routines. Reed's hand slides from my back to my waist as he steers us toward the dance floor, and I'm hyper-aware of the way Alessandro's attention sharpens across the room, like he's cataloging every point of contact between his brother and me for future reference. This is a terrible idea. I should have said no when you showed up at my apartment with that dress and your ridiculous smile. But you didn't say no because you're curious what it feels like to be on this side of the velvet rope for once instead of serving drinks to people who don't bother learning your name. He's right, and we both know it, which is why I let him pull me into a dance even though every instinct is screaming that this is going to end badly for everyone involved. The music is something classical and elegant, the kind of thing that requires actual skill to dance to properly. And I'm grateful my mother insisted on ballroom lessons when I was younger because at least I'm not embarrassing myself while being watched by half the city's elite. Reed dances well enough to make it clear he's had expensive instruction, all smooth movements and practiced charm. And when he leans close to whisper something that's probably inappropriate, I catch Alessandro's eyes over his shoulder and feel electricity shoot through my entire nervous system at the cold fury I see barely contained behind his usual mask of bored indifference. Your brother is staring at us like he's planning our murders. Should I be concerned about my continued employment or just general safety? Alessandro doesn't murder people personally. He has staff for that sort of thing. Reed's tone is teasing, but there's truth underneath that reminds me exactly what kind of family I work for. The kind where wealth comes with edges sharp enough to cut and power that operates in shadows most people pretend don't exist. That's not as reassuring as you think it is. Good. I'd hate for you to get too comfortable. Comfortable is boring, and you're significantly more interesting when you're slightly terrified. The song ends, and Reed releases me with exaggerated reluctance, pressing a kiss to my hand that's pure performance for whoever's watching. And when I glance back toward the bar, I find Alessandro has abandoned his magazine perfect date and is moving through the crowd with the kind of purposeful intensity that suggests we're about to have a conversation I'm absolutely not prepared for. Your brother is coming this way looking like he's about to start issuing commands. I'm going to excuse myself to the bathroom before I get caught in whatever family drama this becomes. Coward, stay and watch the show. It'll be educational. I get paid to clean toilets, not to be entertainment for rich boys with sibling issues. I'm already moving toward the terrace doors because confined spaces with angry thorns seems like a recipe for disaster, and I make it outside into cool night air before I hear footsteps behind me that are too measured and controlled to belong to Reed's usual casual stride. Running away from my brother, or from me, I'm curious which one you're more afraid of disappointing. Alessandro's voice is low and edged with something that might be amusement or possibly contempt, and when I turn to face him, I'm struck by how different he looks up close compared to the distant figure I'm used to serving coffee to every morning, all sharp edges and barely leashed intensity that makes the air between us feel charged with electricity I don't know how to ground. I'm not running away. I'm taking a break from being your brother's amusing social experiment before someone decides I'm overstepping boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Smart. Boundaries exist for reasons, especially ones between family and staff. He moves closer, invading my personal space with the casual entitlement of someone who's never been told no. And though I'm curious what possessed you to say yes when Reed asked you to be his date, surely you're intelligent enough to understand how this looks to people who matter. It looks like your brother is dating someone beneath his station, which apparently bothers you more than it bothers him since he's the one who insisted and I'm the one who tried to refuse. Reed insists on many things without considering consequences. It's a privilege of being the younger son who doesn't have to worry about reputation or family standing. His eyes are doing something that feels like cataloging every detail of my appearance for future analysis. That dress is new, or at least new to you. Did my brother buy it, or did you borrow it from his extensive collection of ex-girlfriends? Does it matter? You've made it clear that I'm inappropriately dressed for the company I'm keeping regardless of where the clothes came from. I didn't say inappropriate. I said you understand boundaries. There's a difference between the two observations. He's close enough now that I can smell his cologne mixing with whiskey and something darker that might just be the danger that radiates off him like heat. You look beautiful, incidentally. Significantly more interesting than anyone else at this tedious event, which is probably why Reed brought you and definitely why I'm standing here having a conversation I shouldn't be having with my family's employee. The compliment delivered in that flat, controlled tone does things to my pulse that have nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the awareness that Alessandro Thorne just admitted he notices me as something other than staff. And the weight of that admission makes it hard to breathe properly. Thank you, I think, though I'm not sure if that was actually a compliment or just another way of pointing out that I don't belong here. Both. I contain multitudes, most of them contradictory. His hand comes up like he's going to touch my face before he catches himself. That almost contact somehow more intimate than if he'd actually followed through. I go back to my brother, dance and smile and let him have his small rebellion. But understand that after tonight things will be different because I can't unknow that you exist as more than just the girl who makes my coffee. And that's going to complicate everything in ways neither of us are prepared to handle. Then he's gone, disappearing back into the ballroom and leaving me standing on the terrace trying to figure out what just happened and why a warning that should terrify me instead feels like the most interesting thing that's been said to me in 3 years of careful invisibility. Before we continue with Clara and Alessandro's story, I want to make a quick request. If you're enjoying this narrative of forbidden romance, silent jealousy, and growing tension, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any chapters. This story has twists you won't want to miss, and your support helps me continue bringing intense and passionate romances like this one. Now, let's go back to the moment when it all began. Chapter 2. The Invisible Girl. 3 years ago, when I first started working for the Thorne family, I was 19 and desperately trying to figure out how to pay for university while supporting my parents, who'd given everything to make sure I had opportunities they never did. And the job came through my father, who'd been driving for the family since before I was born, and had enough trust built up that when he mentioned his daughter needed work, they didn't even interview me properly before handing over keys to rooms I'd be responsible for cleaning. Alessandro had been 31 then, fresh from taking over the family business after his father's semi-retirement. And I'd been terrified of him from the moment I saw him standing in the foyer, giving orders to staff with the kind of cold efficiency that made it clear he expected perfection and wouldn't tolerate anything less. The first time I brought him coffee, I'd been shaking so badly the cup rattled against the saucer, convinced I was going to spill expensive liquid all over expensive furniture and get fired before my first week was complete. But he'd taken it without looking up from whatever documents he was reviewing, and dismissed me with a distracted thank you that made it clear I was already forgotten the moment I left his line of sight. That became the pattern over 3 years of daily interaction, me bringing coffee and straightening rooms and existing in spaces he occupied without ever quite registering as a person, rather than just another piece of functional furniture that served a purpose and required no additional thought or attention. I'd told myself it was better this way, that being invisible meant being safe from the kind of attention that could complicate my carefully structured life of work and school and responsibilities that left no room for dangerous attractions to men who existed in completely different worlds. But there were moments, brief flashes where I'd catch myself watching him move through rooms with that predatory grace, listening to him handle business calls in multiple languages with casual fluency, noticing the way his rare smiles transformed his usually severe features into something almost approachable, and I'd have to remind myself sternly that curiosity about Alessandro Thorne was a luxury I couldn't afford when my entire future depended on maintaining professional boundaries. Reed had been different from the beginning, all easy charm and casual interest that felt safer than his brother's intimidating intensity. And he'd started talking to me during my second month of employment, like the fact that I cleaned his bathroom gave him permission to treat me as an actual person instead of staff. The conversations had been simple at first. Questions about my classes and teasing comments about how serious I always looked. And gradually it evolved into something that resembled friendship, even though we both understood the fundamental inequality that made anything more than that complicated at best and completely inappropriate at worst.
You're staring at Alessandro again. You do that more than you probably realize, and it's going to get you in trouble eventually. Reed's voice behind me makes me jump.
And I turn to find him leaning against the doorframe of the library where I'm supposed to be dusting shelves instead of watching his brother work through the windows that look out on the garden, where Alessandro is having what appears to be a tense phone conversation. I'm not staring. I'm making sure he doesn't need anything before I finish this room. The lie comes easily after 3 years of practice at pretending my awareness of Alessandro is purely professional, rather than something more complicated I refuse to examine too closely. You're terrible at lying. It's actually kind of endearing how bad you are at it. Reed moves into the room with that casual confidence that comes from never having to worry about consequences or boundaries. But seriously, if you're going to develop a crush on my brother, you should at least pick someone more emotionally available. Alessandro hasn't had a genuine feeling since before I was born. I don't have a crush on your brother. I barely interact with him beyond bringing coffee and making sure his office stays organized. Right. And I'm sure the way you always make his coffee exactly how he likes it, even though he's never actually told you his preferences, is just professional excellence and has nothing to do with paying attention to details most people wouldn't notice. The accuracy of his observation makes heat crawl up my neck, and I turn back to the bookshelves because looking at Reed while he's calling me out on feelings I've been trying to ignore for years is more than I can handle right now. Even if I did notice things about your brother, which I'm not admitting, it would be completely irrelevant since he's never looked at me long enough to register that I exist as anything other than the person who keeps his space clean. That's what makes it interesting. You've been invisible to him for 3 years, which means when he finally does notice you properly, it's going to be spectacular. Reed's grin suggests he finds this entire situation far more entertaining than he should. In fact, I'm thinking about accelerating that process. Maybe making sure you're unavoidably visible in contexts where he can't just dismiss you as staff. Please don't. Whatever scheme you're planning is going to backfire, and I'm the one who'll end up fired or worse when your brother decides I've overstepped boundaries that shouldn't be crossed. Or it'll work exactly as planned, and Alessandro will finally pull his head out of his work long enough to notice there's an intelligent, warm, beautiful woman in his house who he's been ignoring for years. Reed, I'm serious. I need this job, and I need your family to keep helping with my university expenses. I can't afford for you to turn me into a pawn in whatever game you're playing with your brother. It's not a game? Or at least not entirely a game. I genuinely think you'd be good for Alessandro if he could get past his control issues long enough to see what's right in front of him. He's moving closer now. Close enough that I'm hyper-aware of the fact that we're alone in a room, and this conversation has crossed from friendly into territory that feels dangerous for reasons I can't fully articulate. And what about you? Where do you fit into this scenario where I'm supposedly good for your brother? Me? I'm the catalyst, the person who makes sure Alessandro can't keep ignoring what he doesn't want to acknowledge. His hand comes up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear in a gesture that's probably meant to be casual, but feels loaded with implications I'm not ready to explore. Besides, spending time with you is significantly more interesting than anything else I could be doing. So even if the Alessandro plan doesn't work out, at least I got to know someone who doesn't bore me within 5 minutes of conversation. That's possibly the most backhanded compliment I've ever received. I'm working on my sincerity. It's a process. The sound of the garden door opening makes us both step apart instinctively. And when Alessandro walks into the library, there's something in his expression that suggests he noticed the proximity and is cataloging it for future reference, even though he addresses Reed without acknowledging my presence at all. Mother called. She wants us both at dinner tonight, and she specifically mentioned that excuses won't be accepted this time. Did she say anything about bringing dates? Because I'm thinking about making tonight interesting. Reed, whatever you're planning, don't. Alessandro's voice carries a warning that makes it clear he knows his brother well enough to anticipate trouble. My mother's dinners are stressful enough without you adding unnecessary complications. Who said anything about complications? I'm just thinking about bringing someone who might actually make the evening bearable. Reed's eyes cut to me meaningfully, and I feel my stomach drop because I know exactly what he's suggesting, and it's possibly the worst idea anyone has ever had. Absolutely not. Alessandro's gaze finally lands on me properly, really looking at me for the first time in 3 years, and the intensity of his attention makes my breath catch in a way that has nothing to do with fear and everything to do with finally being seen. You're not bringing staff to family dinner. That's inappropriate on multiple levels, and you know it. Why is it inappropriate? She's intelligent and educated and significantly better company than most of the people Mother usually invites. Because she works for us, and mixing professional boundaries with family events creates complications that aren't worth whatever point you're trying to make. Or you're uncomfortable with the idea for reasons you don't want to examine too closely. Reed's tone is deliberately provocative, and maybe you've been noticing more than you're willing to admit, and having her at family dinner would force you to acknowledge that. The tension in the room shifts into something dangerous. 2 brothers facing off over implications neither of them is willing to state directly, and I'm standing there trying to figure out if I should leave or stay, or possibly just disappear into the floor to avoid being caught in whatever power struggle this has become. I'm going to finish the library and then move to the guest rooms. If you need anything, I'll be available after 5. I'm already moving toward the door because staying for the rest of this conversation feels like a terrible idea, but Alessandro's voice stops me before I can escape. Wait. I turn back to find him watching me with an expression I can't quite read. Something that might be curiosity or possibly frustration, or maybe both tangled together in ways that make the air between us feel charged with electricity. Oh, what's your name? Your actual first name? I realize I've been employing you for 3 years, and I don't actually know what to call you beyond your last name. The admission that he doesn't know my name after 3 years of daily coffee delivery should probably offend me, but instead it just confirms what I've always known about being invisible in spaces he occupies. And I debate for a moment whether giving him this small piece of information is dangerous or just long overdue. Clara. My name is Clara. Clara. He says it like he's testing how it sounds, and hearing my name in his voice does things to my pulse I absolutely refuse to acknowledge in front of his brother who's watching this entire interaction with barely suppressed glee. Reed, leave Clara alone. Whatever scheme you're planning stops now before it creates problems for everyone involved. Too late. I already invited her to the gala next week and she already said yes. So unless you want to directly forbid your adult employee from accepting social invitations, you're stuck with the situation I've created. Reed's lie is delivered with such casual confidence that I almost miss the fact that this is the first I'm hearing about any gala invitation. And when Alessandro's attention sharpens on me with something that looks dangerously close to betrayal, I realize I'm caught in the middle of something I never agreed to, and have no idea how to navigate. Loar, is that true? Did you agree to attend the charity gala as my brother's date? Chapter 3. The Flirtation That Becomes Provocation. The week between Reed's lie about the gala invitation and the actual event passes in a blur of tension that makes working in the Thorn House feel like navigating a minefield where every interaction could potentially explode into something I'm not equipped to handle. Alessandro has started noticing me in ways that make my skin prickle with awareness. His eyes tracking my movements when I bring morning coffee or straighten his office, and the weight of his attention feels simultaneously thrilling and terrifying in a way that makes it hard to maintain the professional distance I've carefully cultivated for 3 years. Reed, true to his nature of creating chaos and then watching it unfold with amusement, actually did procure an invitation and a dress for the gala, showing up at my apartment 3 days before the event with a garment bag and a grin that suggested he was enjoying this entire situation far more than anyone should. The dress turned out to be the borrowed black silk I ended up wearing, and when I'd protested that accepting felt like crossing lines I'd spent years respecting, he'd just laughed and told me that lines were made to be crossed by people brave enough to take risks. Now I'm standing in Alessandro's office delivering afternoon coffee while he conducts a business call in Italian that sounds tense, based on his clipped tone and the way his jaw keeps clenching with barely controlled frustration. And I'm trying to set down the cup quietly enough not to disturb him when his free hand shoots out to catch my wrist with careful pressure that stops me mid-motion. His skin is warm against mine, and the contact sends electricity shooting up my arm that makes it hard to remember why touching my employer is inappropriate regardless of context or intention. He finishes the call with what sounds like a threat delivered in a deceptively pleasant tone before setting down his phone and looking at me properly, really looking at me in a way he never has before with an intensity that makes my pulse race for reasons that have nothing to do with fear and everything to do with finally being seen as something other than invisible staff. You're actually going through with this, attending the gala with my brother, despite knowing it's a terrible idea that will create exactly the kind of complications I warned against. His voice is controlled, but I can hear frustration underneath, and his thumb is doing something absent on the inside of my wrist that he probably doesn't realize is making it impossible for me to think clearly. Reed invited me, and I said yes, before understanding all the implications. Backing out now would be more awkward than just attending and maintaining appropriate behavior. Appropriate behavior at a charity gala while on the arm of a thorn. Do you have any concept of what that actually means? Or are you walking into this situation completely unprepared for the scrutiny you'll face? I'm aware that people will judge and gossip and probably say terrible things about the hired help who doesn't know her place. I've spent 3 years being invisible in your world, so I understand exactly how people like you view people like me. The words come out sharper than intended. Months of suppressed frustration about being treated as furniture finally finding an outlet. People like me. He repeats it with something that might be amusement or possibly offense. You think you know what kind of person I am based on 3 years of bringing coffee and avoiding eye contact? I know you're the kind of person who doesn't bother learning the names of people who work for you, who issues orders and expects immediate compliance, who treats staff as interchangeable parts of a well-oiled machine rather than actual human beings with thoughts and feelings. And yet here I am, holding your wrist and having a conversation instead of just dismissing you like the terrible employer you've decided I am. His grip loosens but doesn't release, fingers sliding down to thread through mine in a gesture that's far too intimate for the professional relationship we're supposed to be maintaining. You're right that I didn't know your name, that I treated you as invisible for 3 years, but I'm trying to correct that mistake now if you'll stop being defensive long enough to let me. Why now? Why does it suddenly matter after 3 years of me being perfectly content to stay invisible? Because my idiot brother decided to make you visible in the most dramatic way possible, and now I can't unsee what I've been ignoring, can't pretend you're just staff when you're about to walk into a room full of sharks wearing borrowed silk and pretending you belong. That sounds like you're more concerned about appearances than my actual well-being. That sounds like I'm concerned about both and struggling to figure out which concern is appropriate given our respective positions. He releases my hand finally. Standing to put distance between us like proximity is making it harder to maintain the control he clearly values. Reed doesn't do serious. He's 24 and treats dating like a hobby he pursues when bored, which means this gala invitation is either a genuine interest that will fade within weeks or a deliberate provocation aimed at me. Why would provoking you require involving me specifically? There are plenty of women he could bring who wouldn't create complications with employment and social standing. Because you're the only person in this house I've looked at longer than necessary, the only staff member whose presence I register without conscious effort. And my brother is perceptive enough to have noticed that, despite my best efforts to remain professionally distant. The admission hangs in the air between us like a confession he didn't mean to make, and I watch him process his own words with something that looks like frustration, mixed with resignation, that he's revealed more than he intended. You've looked at me. I've been invisible for 3 years, and you're claiming you've been noticing me this entire time? Noticing and acknowledging are different things. I noticed you from approximately month 2, when you started anticipating my coffee preferences without being told, but acknowledging that I was paying attention to the girl who cleans my office felt inappropriate, so I chose to maintain distance instead. That's the most emotionally repressed thing I've ever heard. Welcome to my family. Emotional repression is practically a requirement for survival. His smile is brief and self-deprecating. The point is, Reed knows I've been noticing you, and he's using that knowledge to force a confrontation about boundaries and appropriate behavior that I've been avoiding for reasons that seemed valid until approximately 5 minutes ago. And now, what's changed in the last 5 minutes that makes those reasons less valid? Now I'm having a conversation with you where you're calling me out on my terrible management style and making me explain feelings I don't fully understand myself, which suggests the professional distance I've been maintaining was more fragile than I wanted to admit. The sound of footsteps in the hallway makes us both step back instinctively. And when Reed appears in the doorway with his usual casual energy, he takes one look at our carefully separated positions and grins like he knows exactly what interrupted. Am I interrupting something? You both look guilty, which is interesting given that Clara is supposed to be working, and Alessandro is supposed to be pretending she doesn't exist. You're always interrupting something. It's your defining characteristic. Alessandro's tone is dry, but there's affection underneath the sarcasm. And what do you want, Reed? I wanted to confirm final details for the gala with my date. Make sure she knows what she's getting into before Saturday. Reed's attention shifts to me with warmth that feels genuine despite the chaos he's creating. Though based on the tension in this room, I'm guessing Alessandro has already given you the lecture about appropriate behavior and social boundaries. Something like that, though it was more of a conversation than a lecture. Progress. Alessandro having actual conversations with staff is character development I didn't expect to see this decade. Reed, I'm going to give you exactly 5 seconds to leave my office before I remember all the embarrassing stories I could share with Clara about your teenage years. Empty threats. You'd never compromise your dignified image by telling stories about our shared childhood. But Reed is already moving toward the door with a knowing smile. I'll pick you up at 6 on Saturday, Clara. Wear the dress and prepare yourself for the most entertaining evening you've had since starting work for this family. After he leaves, the silence feels heavier than before, weighted with everything we've said and the implications of what's about to happen at the gala. And when Alessandro speaks again, his voice carries a warning that sounds almost like concern. Be careful with my brother. He means well, but he doesn't always consider the consequences of his actions on people who can't afford to treat social situations as games. And you. Should I be careful with you too? Especially me. I'm significantly more dangerous than Reed, because I actually think about consequences and choose to ignore them anyway when properly motivated. Chapter 4. Contained Jealousy and Family Humor. The family dinner happens 2 nights before the gala, and I'm only there because Thorne specifically requested that Reed bring his date so she could evaluate whether her younger son was finally showing signs of maturity in his romantic choices. And walking into the formal dining room where I've served countless meals but never actually eaten feels like crossing into territory where I'm fundamentally not supposed to exist. Alessandro is already seated at the head of the table with the magazine perfect woman from the gala, whose name I've learned is Vanessa, and who looks at me with the kind of polite disdain that suggests she's already calculated my net worth and found it lacking in every possible measure. Mrs. Thorne is a woman in her early 60s who somehow manages to be both elegant and terrifying. All sharp observations delivered with a smile that never quite reaches her eyes. And when Reed introduces me as his date, I watch her process this information with the kind of careful neutrality that suggests she's reserving judgment until further evidence is presented. Mr. Thorne, semi-retired but still intimidating, just nods like bringing the maid to dinner is exactly the kind of chaos he's come to expect from his younger son, and no longer has the energy to fight. So, Clara, Reed tells me you're studying at university while working for us. That's quite ambitious for someone in your position. Mrs. Thorne's voice is pleasant, but there's assessment underneath. Like she's testing to see if I'll crumble under polite interrogation, or if I have enough spine to deserve a seat at her table. Yes, ma'am. I'm finishing my degree in literature with a minor in business management. Your family's support with tuition has made it possible to pursue education I wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise. Literature. How impractical. Though I suppose having staff who can read above a basic level is useful when they're organizing libraries. Mother, try to be subtle with your condescension. We have at least 3 courses to get through before you can start being openly judgmental. Alessandro's tone is dry, and there's something protective in the way he's watching this interaction that makes me think he's prepared to intervene if his mother's assessment becomes too pointed. And I'm not being condescending. I'm being practical. Literature degrees don't typically lead to lucrative careers, which means Clara will likely continue working in service positions regardless of her education level. Unless she's interested in teaching or publishing or any number of fields where understanding narrative structure and critical analysis are valuable skills. I keep my voice respectful but firm, because letting Mrs. Thorne steamroll me on the first direct conversation we've ever had would set a precedent I can't afford. I'm aware the degree isn't traditionally practical, but I chose it because I'm genuinely interested in the subject, rather than just pursuing the most financially advantageous option. And the passion over pragmatism, how very romantic. Mrs. Thorne's smile sharpened slightly. Though I suppose working for my family provides enough pragmatism to balance out impractical academic pursuits. She also has the highest efficiency rating of any staff we've employed in the last decade. So the literature degree clearly hasn't impaired her ability to function in practical environments. Alessandro's contribution surprises everyone at the table, including me. And when I glance at him, I find he's watching his mother with the kind of calm intensity that suggests he's drawing a line she shouldn't cross. Are you defending your brother's date or your employee, darling? I'm trying to figure out which relationship you're prioritizing in this moment. Vanessa's voice is sweet, but there's poison underneath, and I watch her hand settle possessively on Alessandro's arm like she's marking territory. I'm stating facts about someone who's worked for this family for 3 years with consistent excellence. The fact that she's currently Reed's date is irrelevant to her professional competence. Though it's interesting that you've suddenly noticed her professional competence after 3 years of barely acknowledging her existence. Reed's interjection is delivered with his usual casual charm, but there's deliberate provocation in the observation. One might think having her at this table as something other than staff is forcing you to see qualities you've been intentionally ignoring. One might think you're trying to start an argument at our mother's dinner table, which would be typical of your need for attention regardless of appropriate context. Boys, if you're going to have a territorial dispute over Clara, at least wait until after dessert. I'd hate for the meal to be ruined by premature posturing. Mrs. Thorne's voice carries amusement now. Like watching her sons circle each other over a woman is exactly the kind of entertainment she was hoping for when she arranged this dinner. There's no territorial dispute. Clara is Reed's date. and I'm simply ensuring our mother doesn't make her so uncomfortable she refuses to return to work on Monday. Alessandro's tone suggests the conversation is closed, but his eyes keep tracking back to me with an intensity that contradicts his words. How considerate, protecting your staff from maternal interrogation while your actual girlfriend sits ignored beside you. Vanessa's voice has gone cold, and I can see her calculating whether making a scene is worth the satisfaction of demanding attention. Vanessa, you knew what you were getting into when you agreed to accompany me tonight. My family's dynamics aren't exactly secret. I knew your family was eccentric. I didn't realize I'd be spending dinner watching you pay more attention to the help than to me. Then perhaps you should have chosen a different Thorn to date. Reed is significantly better at providing the kind of focused attention you seem to require. The dismissal is delivered so casually that it takes a moment for the cruelty to register, and I watch Vanessa's face flush with humiliation before she stands with carefully controlled dignity and excuses herself from the table with the excuse about needing air that nobody believes. The silence after she leaves is loaded with implications nobody seems willing to address directly, and Mrs. Thorne is the first to speak with observation that cuts through the tension. Well, that relationship is clearly over. Alessandro do try to end things officially before she starts calling my friends to complain about Thorne family rudeness. It's been over for weeks. She just hasn't accepted it yet. Alessandro's attention is back on me with an intensity that makes it hard to breathe properly. My apologies for the drama, Clara. You shouldn't have been subjected to that particular display of dysfunction. I work for your family. I'm extremely familiar with displays of dysfunction. This barely registers compared to some of the arguments I've witnessed while dusting. She has a point. We are spectacularly dysfunctional in ways that probably seem entertaining from an outside perspective. Reed's hand finds mine under the table in a gesture of solidarity that feels genuine, despite the chaos he deliberately created. From an outside perspective, you're all terrifying and fascinating in equal measure, like watching apex predators interact at a watering hole where everyone is assessing threat levels while maintaining polite conversation. That's the most accurate description of our family dinners I've ever heard. Mr. Thorne speaks for the first time since introductions, his voice carrying approval. You're observant. That's a useful quality to have when navigating situations with people who communicate primarily through subtext and veiled threats. She's also completely correct that we're terrifying, which makes Reed bringing her here either very brave or very stupid depending on your perspective. Alessandro's contribution sounds like criticism, but there's something protective in his tone that suggests he's more concerned about my well-being than his brother's judgment. I prefer to think of it as strategic. Clara is intelligent enough to handle whatever the family throws at her, and interesting enough to make the evening actually engaging instead of just tedious obligation. And the fact that bringing her specifically would irritate Alessandro had nothing to do with your decision. Mrs. Thorne's question is delivered with knowing amusement. That was merely a pleasant bonus to an otherwise purely motivated choice. Reed's grin is unrepentant. The rest of dinner passes with carefully moderated conversation where family members trade observations and subtle criticisms with the kind of practiced ease that comes from years of perfecting the art of elegant verbal warfare. And I find myself both exhausted and exhilarated by the experience of being included in dynamics I've only ever witnessed from the margins. Alessandro continues tracking my responses with attention that feels more personal than professional, and every time our eyes meet across the table I feel electricity that has nothing to do with appropriate employer-employee relationships and everything to do with awareness that's been building between us since the moment Reed forced us both to acknowledge it exists. When dinner finally ends and Reed offers to drive me home, Alessandro intercepts with smooth efficiency that suggests he's been planning this intervention since dessert. I'll take Clara home. You've had 3 glasses of wine, and I don't trust your judgment behind the wheel. I'm perfectly capable of driving, and Clara is my date, which makes taking her home my responsibility. Consider it delegated. I'm heading in that direction anyway, and it's more efficient than you making a detour. The brothers stare at each other in silent communication that I'm not privy to before Reed concedes with theatrical reluctance. Fine, but I expect her returned in the same condition I'm lending her. No corrupting the staff with your brooding intensity. Chapter 5. The Truth About the Brother. The drive to my apartment happens in silence that feels charged with everything we're both deliberately not saying. Alessandro's hands gripping the steering wheel with enough tension that I can see his knuckles white against the leather. And when we pull up in front of my building, instead of just dropping me off, he parks and kills the engine like he's preparing for a conversation neither of us is ready to have. The neighborhood is modest in ways that must feel jarring to someone who lives in a house with more bathrooms than I have rooms. All cracked sidewalks and buildings that need paint jobs nobody can afford. And I'm hyper-aware of the contrast between his expensive car and my rundown reality in ways that make it impossible to forget the fundamental inequality between us. You don't have to walk me up. I'm perfectly capable of getting to my door without escort. I'm aware you're capable. I'm walking you up anyway because leaving you alone at this hour feels wrong, regardless of your proven competence. He's already out of the car and moving around to open my door with the kind of old-fashioned courtesy that shouldn't be attractive but absolutely is. And when he offers his hand to help me out, I take it because refusing would create more awkwardness than just accepting the gesture. The stairs to my third-floor walk-up are narrow and poorly lit. Nothing like the grand staircase in the Thorne house with its perfect lighting and expensive carpet. And I'm acutely conscious of Alessandro behind me in a space that's far too small to contain both of us, and all the tension that's been building since he grabbed my wrist in his office 3 days ago. When we reach my door, I turn to thank him for the ride and find him closer than expected. Near enough that I can smell his cologne and see the gold flecks in his dark eyes that I've never been close enough to notice before tonight. Mom, thank you for defending me at dinner. You didn't have to do that, and it probably made things awkward with your mother. My mother thrives on awkward. It's her natural habitat, and I wasn't defending you so much as stating facts she needed to hear. His hand comes up to brace against the doorframe above my head, effectively caging me in without actually touching. Though I should probably apologize for subjecting you to that entire ordeal. Family dinners are difficult enough without adding the complication of unclear relationships and social boundaries. The relationship isn't unclear. I'm Reed's date and your employee. Those are pretty straightforward categories, even if the execution gets complicated. Except my brother doesn't actually want you the way he's pretending to want you, and I need you to understand that before Saturday, when this entire charade reaches its inevitable conclusion. The bluntness catches me off guard, stripping away the polite pretense we've been maintaining, and forcing us into honesty that feels dangerous in the narrow hallway outside my apartment. What makes you think you know what your brother wants better than he does? Because I've known Reed his entire life, and I recognize the difference between genuine interest and performative attraction designed to provoke a specific response. His voice has gone low and intense. He's using you to make a point, to force me to acknowledge feelings I've been trying to ignore, and when he's accomplished that goal, he'll lose interest, because that's what Reed does with things that stop being entertaining. That's a pretty cynical view of your brother's motivations. Maybe he actually enjoys spending time with me, and the provocation aspect is just a bonus. Maybe, but I've also had conversations with him that you weren't present for. Conversations where he admitted his primary interest in taking you to the gala was seeing how I'd react to watching you with someone else. The admission hits harder than it should, confirming suspicions I've been trying to ignore about Reed's real motivations, and I find myself torn between anger at being used and something that feels dangerously close to hope that Alessandro cares enough about the situation to have this conversation in the first place. So what? I'm just a pawn in whatever complicated dynamic you and Reed have been playing out. Neither of you actually interested in me beyond what my presence accomplishes in your sibling rivalry. Reed isn't interested beyond the game, but I can't speak for him when it comes to my own motivations. Alessandro's free hand comes up to cup my face with a gentleness that contradicts the intensity in his expression. And I confronted him this afternoon after our mother's dinner. Told him that using you to get a reaction from me was cruel and manipulative, and exactly the kind of behavior I expect from him but hoped he'd outgrown. What did he say when you confronted him? He laughed and asked if I was finally ready to admit I've been interested in you for longer than I'm comfortable acknowledging. And when I didn't deny it fast enough, he said the gala plan had already accomplished its purpose, regardless of whether Saturday actually happens. And are you ready to admit you've been interested? Or is this just another version of protecting your staff from inappropriate complications? and I stopped being able to separate professional concern from personal interest approximately 2 years ago, when you started leaving books you thought I'd like on my desk with notes about why specific passages reminded you of conversations we'd never actually had. His thumb strokes across my cheekbone in a gesture that's far too intimate for the professional relationship we're supposed to be maintaining. I told myself it was inappropriate to encourage that kind of attention, that maintaining distance was protecting both of us from complications neither of us needed. But watching Reed touch you and make you laugh and take you places I should have taken you myself made it impossible to keep pretending I don't care. Alessandro, I can't be the person you suddenly decide you want, just because your brother made a move first. I have too much to lose if this goes wrong and you change your mind once the jealousy wears off. You think this is just jealousy? You think 2 years of noticing every detail about you while forcing myself to maintain professional distance is just a reaction to Reed's provocation? I think you're a man who's used to having control, and your brother took something you'd unconsciously claimed, and now you're trying to take it back because losing isn't something you know how to handle gracefully. You're right that I don't handle losing well, but you're wrong about the timeline. I lost control of this situation the first time you brought me coffee, and somehow knew exactly how I take it without ever being told. He leans closer, near enough that I can feel his breath against my lips. And I've been fighting against wanting you since before I had the vocabulary to admit what I was feeling, and Reed's involvement just forced me to stop pretending I could keep you at a safe distance indefinitely. What changed? Why stop pretending now instead of just continuing to ignore what you felt? Because I had to watch my brother's hands on you at dinner while you smiled at him like he was worth your attention, had to see you in a dress that makes you look like you belong in my world instead of just working in it, had to imagine you at the gala Saturday being seen by everyone as his when the only person I want seeing you that way is me. The raw honesty in his words strips away any remaining doubt about whether his interest is genuine or just competitive possessiveness, and I find myself leaning into the hand still cupping my face, despite every logical reason I have to maintain the boundaries he's trying to cross. This is a terrible idea. You're my employer, and getting involved with you means risking everything I've built over the last 3 years. I know, which is why I'm giving you the choice instead of just taking what I want, the way I usually do when I've decided something is mine. His forehead comes to rest against mine. Go to the gala with Reed if that's what you want. Let him have his moment of victory over his controlling older brother. But understand that watching you leave with him is going to be the hardest thing I've done in years. And if I don't want to go with Reed, if I'd rather go with someone who spent 2 years noticing me instead of 2 weeks using me to make a point, then I'll pick you up at 6 on Saturday, and we'll walk into that ballroom together with everyone knowing exactly who you belong to. I don't belong to anyone. I'm not property to be claimed. Poor word choice. Let me rephrase. Everyone will know exactly who chose to be with you and who you chose in return. That's better, but we still need to have a conversation about appropriate boundaries and what happens Monday morning when I'm back to being your employee instead of your date. Monday morning, we'll figure out how to navigate a relationship that's complicated by professional dynamics and social expectations. But tonight, I need to know if I'm taking you to the gala, or if I'm spending Saturday watching my brother touch you while I pretend I don't care. The choice should be obvious. Taking the safe option and going with Reed maintains the status quo and protects me from potential disaster if Alessandro's interest fades once the novelty wears off. But standing here in my narrow hallway with his hand on my face and his admission of 2 years hanging between us makes safe feel significantly less appealing than the risk of saying yes to something that could either be the best decision I've ever made or the catastrophic mistake that costs me everything. Ask me properly. Tell me you want to take me to the gala instead of just offering to rescue me from your brother's schemes. Clara, will you let me take you to the charity gala Saturday night? Will you walk into that ballroom with me knowing that every person there will see you as mine and judge accordingly? Will you risk everything you've carefully built because I'm too selfish to keep pretending I don't want you? Yes, but I have conditions. Name them. You tell Reed yourself that I'm going with you instead of him. You don't make this about protecting me or rescuing me from his manipulation. You tell him the truth that you want me, and you're done pretending you don't. Done. Anything else? Monday morning, we establish actual boundaries about professional conduct, because I'm not losing my job or my scholarship, because we can't figure out how to be adults about attraction.
Agreed. I'll have contracts drawn up that protect your position regardless of what happens between us personally. Then yes, I'll go to the gala with you and deal with whatever consequences come from choosing the dangerous option over the safe one.
He kisses me before I can second-guess the decision. And the contact is nothing like I expected from a man who's spent 3 years maintaining careful distance. All-consuming intensity and barely leashed control that suggests he's been holding back significantly more than I realized. Chapter 6. The Forbidden Approach. The 2 days between Alessandro's kiss outside my apartment and the actual gala pass in a strange limbo where he keeps his word about telling Reed personally, while I navigate the increasingly awkward dynamic of working in a house where everyone seems to know something shifted, even if they're too polite or too entertained to address it directly. Reed takes the news with surprising grace when Alessandro delivers it Friday morning in the library, where I'm pretending to organize books while actually eavesdropping shamelessly. His response a simple observation that he'd accomplished what he set out to do, and didn't particularly care who I attended the gala with, as long as his brother stopped being insufferable about unexpressed feelings.
So you're not angry that I'm stealing your date? You spent 2 weeks setting this up and you're just conceding without any dramatic confrontation.
Alessandro's voice carries suspicion that suggests he knows his brother well enough to expect complications, even in apparent surrender. But I'm not conceding, I'm declaring victory and moving on to other entertainment. The goal was making you admit you've been obsessed with Clara for years and watching you actually pursue something you want instead of just controlling everything from a distance. Mission accomplished. Reed's tone is satisfied rather than upset. Besides, she deserves someone who's genuinely interested rather than someone using her as a social experiment. And despite your emotional constipation, you're clearly invested in ways I'd never actually be. That's surprisingly mature for someone who usually handles rejection by creating chaos. I'm not being rejected. I'm strategically withdrawing from a situation I engineered specifically to reach this outcome. There's a difference. You're impossible. And you're welcome. Try not to completely mess this up with your tendency to overthink everything until it stops being fun. I hear footsteps approaching and barely manage to look busy with the books, before Reed appears in the doorway with a grin that suggests he knew I was listening the entire time. For what it's worth, Clara, I genuinely do think you're interesting, and I enjoyed the time we spent together even if my motivations were less than pure. Thanks, I think, though knowing I was part of some elaborate scheme to fix your brother's emotional issues is somewhat less flattering than being actually wanted. Oh, you're definitely actually wanted, just by the wrong brother for my purposes, which worked out exactly as planned, so everyone wins. He moves closer with that casual charm that I've learned to recognize as performance rather than genuine interest. Try to be patient with Alessandro. He's going to overthink every aspect of this relationship until he's convinced himself it's doomed. Just keep being direct and refusing to let him hide behind professional distance. That's surprisingly helpful advice from someone who allegedly doesn't care about the outcome. I care about my brother being less insufferable, and you seem capable of accomplishing that in ways the rest of us have failed at for decades. So consider it investment in my own future comfort. After Reed leaves, I find Alessandro standing in the doorway watching me with an intensity that's become familiar over the last few days. All controlled observation that makes my skin prickle with awareness that working here is going to be significantly more complicated now that we've acknowledged what exists between us. You heard all of that. I can tell by the way you're avoiding eye contact while pretending to alphabetize books that were already organized. I may have overheard some of the conversation. Professional curiosity about discussions that directly involve me. Professional curiosity. Is that what we're calling eavesdropping now? His voice carries amusement as he moves into the library, and suddenly the large room feels too small to contain both of us, and the tension that hasn't diminished despite the kiss that should have released some of the pressure. I'm allowed to be curious about conversations where I'm apparently the subject of elaborate schemes and emotional revelations. Besides, you were talking in a library where I was actively working, so technically you were having private conversations in public spaces. That's excellent rationalization. You'd make a good lawyer with that kind of logical flexibility. He's close enough now that I have to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. We need to discuss boundaries for how this works starting Monday. I meant what I said about protecting your position, but we should establish clear guidelines about appropriate workplace conduct. Guidelines like you not cornering me in libraries where anyone could walk in and see their employer standing inappropriately close to staff. Exactly like that. Though I'm finding it significantly harder than anticipated to maintain professional distance when you're in the same room. His hand comes up to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear, in a gesture that's becoming familiar. Meet tomorrow night at the gala. We can be whatever we want to each other without worrying about professional boundaries. But Monday morning, we need to figure out how to exist in the same space without creating complications that could damage your reputation or position. What if I don't want to wait until tomorrow night? What if maintaining professional distance until then feels impossible after you've already kissed me and admitted 2 years of wanting? Then we're both struggling with the same problem, which doesn't make it easier, but at least means we're equally compromised. Alessandro, I need you to understand something before we go any further with this. I put my hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat under expensive fabric. I'm not going to be your secret. I'm not going to hide what we are or pretend nothing changed just because acknowledging it publicly makes people uncomfortable. If we're doing this, then we're doing it honestly or not at all. I'm not asking you to be a secret. I'm asking for discretion while we figure out how to navigate a relationship that's complicated by the fact that I'm your employer and you're financially dependent on this job. Discretion that looks like what exactly? We're together outside of work but strangers during business hours. Discretion that looks like professional conduct in front of other staff and family, while privately being whatever we want to be when we're alone. His hand covers mine on his chest. Well, I'm not trying to hide you, Clara. I'm trying to protect you from gossip and judgment that could make working here intolerable. There's a difference between secrecy and appropriate boundaries. And Saturday night when we walk into that gala together, is that appropriate boundaries, or is that you making a public statement about what I am to you? That's me making it clear to everyone who matters that you're with me, and anyone who has a problem with that can direct their complaints to me personally, rather than making your life difficult. Good. Because I'm not interested in half measures or casual involvement. If I'm risking everything to be with you, then I need to know you're willing to risk something too. I'm risking significantly more than you realize by pursuing this. But yes, I'm willing to deal with whatever consequences come from choosing you over easier options that wouldn't complicate every aspect of my life. The sound of footsteps makes us step apart instinctively. And when Mrs. Thorne appears in the library doorway with knowing eyes and a slight smile, I realize we're significantly less subtle than we think we are about what's developing between us. Alessandro, darling, your father needs you in his office for signatures. Apparently there are contracts that can't wait. Her attention shifts to me with assessment that feels less hostile than at dinner. Clara, when you're finished here, please come find me in the drawing room. I'd like to discuss your continued employment given the changing dynamics in this household. She leaves before either of us can respond, and the weight of that summons settles over me with implications I'm not ready to fully process about whether Mrs. Thorne is going to support or sabotage whatever Alessandro and I are attempting to build. She's not going to fire you. My mother is many things, but she's not stupid enough to lose excellent staff over her son's romantic choices. Alessandro's voice carries certainty he might not actually feel. Talk to her, be honest, and remember that she respects people who stand up to her significantly more than people who crumble under interrogation. Easy for you to say when your employment doesn't depend on her approval. My entire inheritance depends on her approval, so I'm significantly more aware of the stakes than you're giving me credit for. He presses a quick kiss to my forehead before heading toward his father's office. I'll see you tomorrow night at 6. Wear something that makes me forget how to think clearly because I want everyone at that gala understanding exactly how completely gone I am for you. Chapter 7. The night that changes everything. The gala dress Alessandro has delivered to my apartment Friday afternoon is nothing like the borrowed silk Reed provided. all deep emerald green that somehow matches my eyes perfectly, and fabric that moves like water when I try it on, expensive in ways that make it clear he's not content with me wearing someone else's cast-offs when I'm attending as his date, rather than his brother's consolation prize. The note tucked in the box is written in his precise handwriting. Just a single line that makes my heart race with anticipation, mixed with terror, about what tonight actually means for everything I've carefully built over 3 years of professional distance. Wear this and nothing else will matter except how you look at me when I tell you the truth I've been avoiding. When he arrives at exactly 6 wearing a tuxedo that should be illegal for how well it fits. The expression on his face when I open the door makes every anxiety about whether I belong in his world temporarily disappear under the weight of being looked at like I'm the only thing that exists in this moment. He doesn't speak immediately, just takes in every detail with an intensity that makes my skin flush with heat that has nothing to do with the temperature in my small apartment. And when he finally moves, it's to step inside and close the door behind him, like he needs privacy for whatever he's about to say. You're devastating. That dress was made for you, and seeing you in it is making it very difficult to remember that we have an event to attend where I'm supposed to maintain some level of professional composure. His voice is rough with emotion he's not trying to hide, and the vulnerability in his expression strips away the controlled mask he usually wears in a way that makes him seem more human and somehow more dangerous simultaneously. Mo, you clean up pretty well yourself. I've seen you in tuxedos before, but knowing you're wearing this one for me specifically makes it significantly harder to maintain appropriate boundaries. Then don't maintain boundaries. Not tonight. Let me have you without restrictions or professional distance, and tomorrow we'll figure out how to exist in the real world with all its complications. He moves closer, hands coming up to frame my face with a gentleness that contradicts the intensity in his dark eyes. I need you to understand something before we leave this apartment, before we walk into that gala and make this public. I'm not doing this casually, and I'm not experimenting with attraction that will fade once the novelty wears off. Then what are you doing? What is this to you beyond wanting something your brother tried to claim first? This is me finally admitting I've been in love with you since you left that first book on my desk with a note about how a specific passage reminded you of the conversation we'd had about responsibility versus duty. The one where you somehow understood things about me I've never articulated to anyone, including myself. The confession is delivered with raw honesty that steals my breath. I've spent 2 years trying to convince myself it was inappropriate fascination that would pass if I maintained enough distance, and watching Reed touch you made it impossible to keep lying about what I feel. Alessandro, I don't know how to process you telling me you've been in love with me for 2 years when you couldn't even remember my name 3 weeks ago. I remembered your name. I pretended not to remember because acknowledging I knew it meant acknowledging I'd been paying attention in ways that felt dangerous to admit. His thumb strokes across my cheekbone. Every book you left, every coffee you made exactly how I needed it without being told, every time you anticipated what I'd want before I asked, I was falling deeper while telling myself it was just professional compatibility rather than something more. And now, what changed that makes admitting this suddenly acceptable when it wasn't before? I realized that appropriate boundaries were costing me something I'm not willing to lose, that maintaining professional distance was protecting me from vulnerability, but also preventing me from having the one genuine relationship that's ever made me want to be better than what I am. I'm terrified this is going to end badly. That Monday morning reality is going to crash down and you're going to regret everything you're saying right now, when you remember I'm still your employee, and you're still the person who controls whether I keep my job and scholarship. Then we'll make sure Monday morning doesn't change what we are to each other. I'll have legal documents drawn up that guarantee your position regardless of our personal relationship. I'll establish boundaries that protect you from any accusation of advancement through inappropriate means. His forehead comes to rest against mine. I'm asking you to trust that I know the difference between wanting someone and being willing to destroy their life to have them. I won't let this cost you everything you've built, even if it ends up costing me everything I have. The sincerity in his voice breaks through the last of my defenses, and I find myself reaching up to pull him closer, instead of maintaining the careful distance I should be preserving, until we've figured out how this actually works in practice, rather than just theory. Would take me to the gala,
show everyone that I'm yours, and after we'll figure out how to make this work without destroying each other in the process. The gala is exactly as overwhelming as I expected. All dangerous people in expensive clothes making polite conversation that barely disguises the power plays and territorial assessments happening beneath surface courtesy. And walking in on Alessandro's arm with his hand possessive on my lower back makes it immediately clear to everyone present that the dynamics in the Thorne household have shifted in ways that will be subject of gossip for weeks. His mother watches our entrance with knowing satisfaction that suggests she'd anticipated this outcome long before either of us admitted what was developing. And when she approaches during the cocktail hour, her first words confirm that the conversation she demanded Friday was less about firing me and more about establishing expectations. "Clara, you look lovely. That dress is significantly better than the borrowed thing Reed had you wearing last time. My son has excellent taste when he's actually paying attention to what matters." Mrs. Thorne's assessment is approving rather than critical. I assume Alessandro has explained that I'm not opposed to this relationship, as long as certain boundaries are maintained and your work doesn't suffer from divided attention. He mentioned you wanted to discuss my continued employment, though the conversation got postponed by other events. Consider this the discussion. You'll continue in your current position with a salary increase that reflects the awkwardness of your new situation, and in 6 months we'll reassess whether maintaining both relationships is sustainable, or if we need to transition you into a different role that doesn't create conflicts of interest. She says it with the casual efficiency of someone used to solving problems with money and strategic planning. Alessandro has made it clear that losing you isn't acceptable regardless of how complicated the logistics become, so we're adapting rather than fighting what's clearly inevitable. Thank you. That's significantly more supportive than I expected given the unconventional circumstances. My dear, I've spent 34 years watching Alessandro maintain control over every aspect of his life. Seeing him actually want something enough to risk that control is refreshing enough that I'm willing to accommodate the complications. Her smile is genuine rather than performative. You just don't break his heart. He's significantly more fragile than he pretends to be, and I'm rather fond of seeing him happy for once. The rest of the evening passes in a blur of introductions, where Alessandro makes it clear through careful word choice and possessive touches that I'm with him in ways that transcend professional relationships. And every conversation reinforces that he meant what he said about making this public regardless of social consequences, or judgment from people who think staff shouldn't mix with family. When we finally escape to the terrace for air, the relief of being alone is overwhelming, and I find myself leaning against the railing trying to process everything that's happened in the span of a few hours. That was intense. I've never been the subject of that much scrutiny while pretending to be comfortable with people whose net worth exceeds my lifetime earning potential. You handled it perfectly, better than most people born into this world who should be accustomed to constant evaluation. Alessandro moves behind me, arms coming around my waist to pull me back against his chest. I'm proud of you for not letting them intimidate you into apologizing for existing in spaces you've earned the right to occupy. I had excellent support. You made it very clear that anyone who had a problem with my presence could take it up with you directly. And I meant it. You're not a secret or a temporary fascination. You're the woman I'm choosing publicly regardless of who disapproves. I turn in his arms to face him properly, struck by how different he looks when he's not maintaining careful control. All soft edges and genuine emotion that makes him seem younger and somehow more real than the intimidating CEO I've spent 3 years serving coffee to without ever really seeing. Take me home. Not to my apartment, but to yours. I want to see the parts of your life you don't show anyone else. Clara, if I take you home tonight, we both know we're not just looking at my book collection. We're crossing a line we can't uncross, and Monday morning becomes significantly more complicated. I know, and I'm asking anyway because waiting feels impossible when you've just spent an entire evening showing me exactly how serious you are about this. His kiss is answer enough, and when we leave the gala early with barely polite excuses to his parents, there's understanding in their expressions that suggests they know exactly what we're rushing toward and approve despite the complications it creates. Intimate scene, elegantly written, emotionally focused.
His house is exactly what I expected. All expensive minimalism mixed with unexpected warmth in the form of overflowing bookshelves and personal touches that suggest someone actually lives here, rather than just existing in beautiful spaces. The library he shows me first is floor-to-ceiling books, organized by some system only he understands. And when he pulls me close in the middle of all that carefully curated knowledge, I realize this is him sharing something precious, rather than just seducing me in impressive surroundings. What happens next is inevitable and overwhelming. 2 years of suppressed want finally finding release in touches that are both desperate and tender, in whispered admissions that strip away every defense we've maintained, in the discovery that being together feels exactly right despite every logical reason it shouldn't. The connection is profound rather than just physical, emotional intimacy that makes everything else fade into irrelevance. And when it's over, we're tangled together in his bed, breathing hard and staring at each other like we can't quite believe we finally stopped fighting what we both wanted. I love you. I should have said it before we did that, but I was too overwhelmed to form coherent words. His voice against my hair is rough with emotion. I love you too. Have loved you longer than I'm comfortable admitting, given how thoroughly you ignored my existence for most of that time. I'm sorry for those 2 years. For making you feel invisible, when you were the only person I actually saw in rooms full of people demanding my attention. Then make up for it now, see me clearly, and choose me consistently, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. We're reaching the final chapter of The Invisible Maid, and before discovering how Clara and Alessandro's story resolves, I, Lena, need to know, from 0 to 10, what rating do you give this story so far? Leave your rating in the comments. And also tell me, what was your favorite moment? Was it when Alessandro finally admitted he'd been noticing her for 2 years? When he confronted Reed? The kiss at her apartment door? Or the night that changed everything? I want to know which scene made your heart race. Your answers help me understand what you love most in romances like this. Now let's go to the final chapter, where Vanessa returns and everything gets even more complicated. Chapter 8. Ending 3 months after the gala. Everything about working in the Thorne house has shifted in ways that are simultaneously subtle and completely obvious to anyone paying attention. And I'm navigating the strange reality of being both Alessandro's girlfriend and still technically employed by his family in a role that's evolved from cleaning rooms to something that resembles personal assistant, mixed with permanent fixture in spaces I used to only occupy as staff. The legal documents Alessandro promised materialized within a week of our night together. Contracts that guarantee my position and scholarship regardless of our personal relationship status. And his mother made good on the salary increase with efficiency that suggested she'd been planning this outcome long before either of us admitted what was developing. Monday mornings still feel complicated despite the protections in place. Walking the line between professional conduct in front of other staff and the intimacy that exists when we're alone in his office with the door closed. And I've learned to read the subtle signals that indicate when he's Alessandro, my employer, versus when he's just Alessandro, who can't seem to stop touching me whenever we're in the same room. The family has adjusted with varying degrees of grace, his father treating the entire situation with amused resignation, while Reed takes credit for engineering our relationship at every possible opportunity, despite having minimal actual involvement beyond the initial provocation that forced Alessandro to acknowledge what he'd been ignoring. You're doing that thing where you overthink while pretending to organize files. I can tell because you've been staring at the same document for 5 minutes without actually reading it. Alessandro's voice behind me makes me jump slightly, and when I turn, I find him leaning against his desk, with the kind of casual confidence that suggests he's been watching me long enough to notice my distraction. I'm not overthinking. I'm processing the fact that Vanessa called your mother yesterday asking about family dinner invitations. Apparently, she's under the impression that your relationship with her was just a temporary break, rather than the permanent ending you claimed it was. Vanessa is delusional if she thinks I'm interested in resuming anything with her after she spent months being condescending to my staff, and generally making everyone around her miserable with her need for constant validation. He moves closer, hands settling on my waist to pull me against him despite the open door and the possibility of other staff walking past.
Now she's also strategic enough to recognize that being connected to this family provides access to power and money she can't get elsewhere. So her sudden interest in reconciliation has nothing to do with actual feelings, and everything to do with positioning. Your mother seemed to think the call was worth mentioning, which suggests she's concerned about Vanessa creating complications we don't need right now. My mother mentions everything she thinks might be relevant. It's her way of staying informed while pretending to be helpful. But Vanessa showing back up doesn't change anything about what you and I are building together. His kiss is brief but possessive, the kind of claim that makes it clear he's not interested in entertaining alternatives regardless of how persistent his ex-girlfriend becomes. I'm not worried about you choosing her over me. I'm worried about her making my life difficult, because she's decided I'm the reason you ended things. Then I'll make it very clear to Vanessa that you had nothing to do with my decision, and that any attempt to target you will be met with consequences she won't enjoy. The sound of heels clicking on marble interrupts whatever response I was about to make. And when I look past Alessandro toward the office door, I see a woman I recognize from photos in the house. All sophisticated elegance and calculated beauty that speaks to money and breeding, and exactly the kind of person who belongs in Alessandro's world, in ways I'm still learning to navigate. Vanessa's smile when she sees us is sharp enough to cut, taking in our proximity and his hand still on my waist with assessment that makes it immediately clear she understands exactly what she's looking at, and has already calculated how to use it against us. Alessandro, darling, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Your mother mentioned you'd be in your office this morning, and I thought I'd stop by to discuss some charity board business we left unresolved. Her voice is pleasant, but there's steel underneath. And when her attention shifts to me, there's dismissal in her expression that makes it clear she still sees me as staff rather than competition worth acknowledging. Vanessa, this is unexpected. I wasn't aware we had any unresolved charity business that couldn't be handled through proper channels. Alessandro's tone has gone cold and professional. The warmth from moments ago completely disappeared behind the mask he wears when dealing with people he doesn't trust. Well, things have been so chaotic since our misunderstanding at your mother's dinner. I thought it might be good to clear the air and discuss how we move forward with our respective responsibilities to the foundation. There was no misunderstanding. I ended our relationship and made that decision very clear. Any foundation business you have can be directed to my assistant who handles all charity correspondence. I see you've promoted the help. How progressive of you, Alessandro. Though I do hope you've considered how this looks to people who matter in terms of professional boundaries and appropriate conduct. The condescension is barely disguised, and I watch Alessandro's expression shift from cold to dangerous, with a speed that suggests Vanessa just made a tactical error she's going to regret. Clara is my girlfriend, and her previous employment status is irrelevant to our personal relationship. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly, or find themselves removed from social circles they've worked very hard to access. The threat is delivered with casual efficiency. But now, if you'll excuse us, we have actual work to complete, and your presence is neither required nor welcome in this office or this house going forward. You're choosing her over maintaining relationships with people who actually understand your world. That's remarkably short-sighted even for someone as controlled as you. Vanessa's smile has gone brittle. I wonder how long it will take before you realize that novelty fades, and you're left with someone who can't navigate the complexities of the life you actually live. I'm choosing someone who makes me want to be better than what I was raised to be, which is significantly more valuable than maintaining relationships with people who only care about access to power and money. Alessandro's hand finds mine, threading our fingers together in a gesture of solidarity. And this conversation is over. Please see yourself out before I have security escort you from the property. Vanessa's departure is graceful despite the dismissal. All controlled dignity that suggests she's not giving up on whatever plan she's formulating, but is smart enough to retreat when outmaneuvered. The silence after she leaves feels heavy with implications about complications I'd hoped we'd avoided by being public about our relationship from the beginning. And when I look at Alessandro, I see concern beneath his usual controlled expression. She's going to be a problem. You understand that, right? She's not the type to just accept rejection and move on quietly. Let her be a problem. We knew this wasn't going to be easy when we decided to do this publicly. Having an ex-girlfriend who's bitter about being replaced is relatively minor compared to other complications we could face.
I don't want you dealing with her targeting me because I'm convenient to attack. You have enough to manage without adding my problems to your list of responsibilities. Your problems are my problems now. That's how this works when you're in an actual relationship instead of just casual involvement. He pulls me close, arms wrapping around me with protectiveness that makes me feel both safe and slightly claustrophobic. Vanessa can try whatever she wants to try, but she's underestimating how far I'm willing to go to protect what matters to me, and you matter more than maintaining polite relationships with people I never actually liked. Just promise me we'll handle this together, instead of you making decisions about what I can handle without consulting me first. I promise to try. Old habits are hard to break, but I'm learning that you're significantly more capable of handling difficult situations than I give you credit for. Later that evening, when we're alone in his library with books and wine, and the comfortable silence that's become familiar over 3 months of actually being together, I find myself thinking about Vanessa's parting shot about novelty fading, and whether Alessandro will eventually realize that choosing someone from my world over his creates more problems than it solves. He must sense the direction of my thoughts, because he sets down his book and pulls me into his lap with easy strength, forcing me to look at him instead of spiraling into anxieties about inadequacy. And stop overthinking whatever Vanessa said. She's wrong about novelty fading, because what I feel for you isn't novelty. It's recognition of something I've been missing my entire life without knowing what to call it. And what's that? What am I giving you that you couldn't find with someone who actually belongs in your world? Honesty without agenda, affection without calculation, someone who sees me as Alessandro rather than just the thorn heir with access to power and money. His hand comes up to cup my face. You make me feel human instead of just functional, and that's worth more than anything else I could build or maintain in this world. I kiss him instead of trying to articulate how much those words mean. And in the warmth of his library, surrounded by books and the tangible evidence of a life we're building together, I let myself believe that maybe Vanessa is wrong about us. Maybe what we have is strong enough to survive whatever complications she or anyone else tries to create. But even as I think it, I can't quite shake the feeling that this is just the beginning of challenges we'll face from people who think I don't belong in Alessandro's world, and that surviving those challenges will require more than just love and good intentions. It will require choosing each other consistently, even when that choice becomes difficult. And that's a test I'm not sure either of us is fully prepared for yet. The end. For now.